Karoline walked into the discussion expecting another exchange she could manage with ease. That expectation shifted when Jasmine calmly slid a single sheet of paper across the table, changing the tone of the entire conversation. It was just after 8:40 a.m. on a Thursday morning. The panel already felt tense. 4 participants sat under studio lights, 3 cameras were rolling, and even a producer in the control room later said they sensed something important was about to happen. Jasmine Crockett remained composed, lips pressed lightly together, a pen resting in her hand. She showed no signs of discomfort or defensiveness. She looked ready. Karoline Leavitt, on the other hand, had led the conversation for nearly 10 minutes. She frequently interrupted the moderator and moved quickly between points, as if following a familiar routine. Her tone was firm and at times dismissive, directing several pointed remarks toward Crockett, some subtle, others more direct. Then the moment shifted. The moderator turned to Jasmine and asked if she wanted to respond. Jasmine didn't pause. She looked directly at Karoline and said, "Sure, but before I respond to her opinion, we should address the real reason she speaks so strongly about mine." The room grew quiet. Jasmine reached into a folder on her lap and took out a document. She briefly held it up before passing it to the moderator. "This is an internal memo," she explained in a steady voice. "It was circulated 2 weeks ago and approved by her campaign. It outlines a strategy focused on minority female representatives, not based on policy but on tone. The idea is to present us as aggressive, unstable, and unreasonable, especially when we respond firmly." Karoline tried to respond but hesitated. Jasmine continued, "This wasn't meant to be public, but it was shared with me. I chose not to say anything until I confirmed it was authentic. Now that I have, and since we're discussing this on national television, it's only fair to address all of it." Karoline reacted quickly. "That's not true," she said sharply. "You're lying. This is a setup." Her voice began to shake slightly. The control she had earlier started to slip. She glanced toward the moderator, who remained still, then looked off camera toward the producers. For a moment, she stood up before sitting back down, appearing unsure how to respond. "You think you can damage my credibility with a fake memo?" Karoline said, raising her voice. "You're trying to present yourself as a victim again." Jasmine remained calm. "I'm not presenting anything," she replied. "I'm simply reading what your team wrote about people like me. If that's uncomfortable, then it's worth asking why it was written in the first place." The discussion began to lose structure. The moderator attempted to regain control, but the tension had already shifted the atmosphere. A producer eventually cut to a commercial break, but the moment had already made an impact. Karoline continued speaking as the broadcast faded out. What viewers didn't initially see was the brief, unedited studio footage that surfaced shortly afterward. In that clip, Karoline removed her microphone, walked in small circles, and spoke quietly but with visible frustration. At one point, she turned toward a producer and said, "She set me up. She knew I couldn't respond without it reflecting poorly on me." Within a short time, the clip spread widely, across social media platforms, television segments, and radio discussions. The reaction wasn't just about Karoline's response. Many viewers focused on the broader implication raised during the exchange. The idea that some criticisms may come from structured messaging rather than genuine disagreement. However, the situation did not begin in that studio. It started several days earlier, before any cameras were present. 5 days prior, Jasmine Crockett sat in a small cafe in downtown Des Moines, Iowa. It wasn't a major political setting, but it was a place she preferred for private conversations. Across from her sat her longtime friend, Shelby Barnes. Shelby had never been involved in politics, but she had a strong sense of how people think and respond. That day, she chose to be direct, offering advice without softening her words. Karoline wasn't just challenging the conversation. She was positioning it, carefully guiding it toward a reaction she expected to control. Shelby noticed it immediately and stirred her coffee slowly before speaking. "Karoline isn't simply provoking you, Jazz," she said. "She's setting a trap. She wants you to react. That's the entire strategy." Jasmine leaned back slightly in her chair. She understood what Shelby meant. "I know," she replied with a quiet exhale. "But I'm not giving her that. She wants a spectacle, and I'm not going to be part of it." Even so, her thoughts were already moving ahead. This wasn't the first time Karoline had taken aim at her. It had happened before more than once. Their history was complicated, shaped by constant tension and Karoline's habit of staying camera-ready, always speaking in polished, memorable lines for public attention. They had crossed paths in hearings, public forums, and even private Washington dinners. Yet Karoline often used those moments to speak down to her or dismiss her perspective. It wasn't new, just increasingly consistent. 2 weeks earlier, Jasmine had heard vague talk about a strategy meeting within Leavitt's team. Nothing confirmed, only scattered rumors, enough to keep in mind but not act on immediately. Then an anonymous email arrived in her inbox. No subject line, no message, just a file attached labeled, Draft Messaging Memo, Internal Use Only. She didn't open it right away. Experience had taught her caution. It could easily have been fake, altered, or planted to mislead her. 3 days later, she had the document verified through a trusted contact connected to the network. It was real. Inside was exactly what concerned her. A communication strategy designed not to debate ideas, but to shape perception. It described tactics aimed at discrediting her and others like her through carefully chosen language. The goal was to provoke emotional responses and then use those reactions as supposed evidence of unprofessional behavior. One line stood out clearly: push them to frustration and the audience will fill in the rest. Jasmine didn't share the document with anyone at first, not even her chief of staff. She read it repeatedly, almost studying the language until it felt heavier each time. What unsettled her most wasn't just the content, but the intent behind it: calculated, deliberate framing meant to influence perception. And it wasn't limited to her alone. It extended to others who shared similar traits or communication styles, especially women who were often labeled too loud, too emotional, or too direct when speaking firmly. That, she realized, was the broader pattern being described. By Sunday night, Jasmine made a decision. If Karoline wanted a public confrontation, she would not avoid it. But she would not approach it on the same emotional terms as before. She would stay controlled, rely on facts, and let the information speak for itself. Her team was not fully aware of her plan. She simply told them she would handle the panel herself. "Trust me," she said calmly. "I've got this." By Monday, media attention was already building. The network began promoting the upcoming segment across its platforms. 2 outspoken figures from different sides. Live on Thursday. The expectation was clear: tension, disagreement, and conflict. What Karoline didn't realize was that Jasmine wasn't just preparing to respond. She was preparing to present something that couldn't be dismissed with rehearsed talking points. And she had chosen the timing very carefully. Thursday morning arrived quietly, almost too calmly for what was ahead. The studio was located in Scottsdale, Arizona, selected mainly for production convenience and neutrality. Jasmine arrived early as she always did. Not for styling or technical rehearsal, but to ground herself. She preferred a few quiet minutes to breathe, settle, and focus. She kept her greetings brief, offered polite acknowledgments to the crew, and sat in the green room reviewing her notes. A simple navy folder stayed in her lap the entire time. Karoline arrived shortly after with her media assistant and consultant. They carried coffee, wardrobe backups, and a garment bag, moving quickly with practiced energy. Karoline spoke often, laughed easily, and treated the space like another campaign stop. When she noticed Jasmine, she barely acknowledged her presence. A junior producer commented quietly, "Is she always this quiet before segments?" Jasmine heard it but didn't respond. She remained focused on her notes, steady and composed. 10 minutes before going live, a production assistant entered the room. "We're on in 10. Mic's in 2. That was when Jasmine stood up, placed the folder under her arm, and walked toward the producer in the hallway. "I have a document I'd like to share during the discussion," she said calmly. "It's relevant to the topic. Nothing dramatic, just context." The producer raised a brow but nodded. "As long as it doesn't derail the segment." "It won't," Jasmine replied. "It will clarify it." She entered the studio without hesitation. No scanning the room, no visible reaction to the atmosphere. She already understood the energy: controlled, structured, and quietly competitive. Karoline was already seated, adjusting her microphone and checking her reflection in the monitor. When she saw Jasmine, she smiled slightly. "You finally brought notes," Karoline said, her tone light but edged with sarcasm, meant for those nearby to hear. Jasmine took her seat without reacting. "I always have notes," she replied evenly. "Just didn't need them for you." A brief silence followed. A few crew members exchanged glances. The tension was subtle but noticeable. The moderator proceeded with the standard briefing: topics, timing, and structure. Jasmine nodded politely, but her focus was elsewhere. The segment she was preparing for wasn't written on any outline. Minutes before going live, she checked her microphone, secured the folder again, and read a line from the memo that had stayed with her since she first saw it. If they defend themselves quickly, call it emotional. If they hesitate, call it rehearsed. Either way, they lose. She didn't say it out loud for effect. She repeated it quietly as a reminder to stay grounded. When the countdown began, 5, 4, 3, she took a slow breath and remained still. Her goal wasn't confrontation. It was clarity. The red light came on. They were live. The moderator opened the segment with a formal introduction, presenting both guests. Polite acknowledgments followed. Karoline nodded confidently. Jasmine offered a steady, neutral expression. The early questions were standard: policy, governance, public priorities. Karoline spoke first, quickly and confidently, framing her points as structured and reasonable. She rarely paused, delivering each statement like a practice talking point. Jasmine listened without interruption. Then the fifth question shifted toward political rhetoric and public discourse. The moderator asked how the conversation could move forward when it increasingly turned personal. Jasmine paused briefly, tapping her pen once against the folder. "I think the better question," she said calmly, "is who benefits from those personal attacks, and how they are structured in the first place." Karoline tilted her head slightly. "Is that supposed to mean something?" Jasmine met her gaze evenly. "You can decide that." She opened the folder, removed the document, and handed it to the moderator. "This is an internal strategy document," she said in a steady voice. "It outlines messaging approaches aimed at discrediting women in public office, especially black women. It focuses less on policy and more on framing personality. It suggests provoking emotional reactions and then using those reactions as criticism." Karoline let out a short, dismissive laugh. "This is absurd. It's not real." Jasmine didn't raise her voice or react. "You can read it for yourself," she replied. "It's dated, signed, and internally reviewed by 2 senior members of her media team. The document includes my name along with 2 other representatives. It describes us as overly reactive, easily influenced, and emotionally unstable when under pressure." The moderator glanced down at the paper, frowning slightly as he read. "I didn't come here to perform," Jasmine continued. "I came here to ask why this kind of playbook is acceptable, and why we describe people as emotional, instead of examining why they are responding in the first place." Karoline leaned forward, her tone tightening. "This is exactly what you do," she said. "You turn everything into race and gender. You don't have facts, so you play the victim card. It's embarrassing." The studio atmosphere grew more tense. Jasmine remained calm and didn't react immediately. "I'm not playing anything," she replied. "I'm presenting facts, and your reaction is helping illustrate them." Karoline's voice rose. "You planned this. You set this up. You wanted it to go viral. You don't care about accuracy, you care about attention." Jasmine raised her eyebrows slightly. "You're upset because the attention is on you now." Karoline stood up suddenly. In the control room, producers began reacting quickly, some signaling to cut the feed, others holding back. From a ratings perspective, the situation was already escalating. The moderator tried to bring the discussion back on track, but Karoline continued speaking over him. "You blindsided me with fabricated paperwork," she said. "You want to make this about identity because you can't handle a real debate." Jasmine leaned forward slightly, still composed. "A real debate requires honesty," she said. "If you want to discuss ideas, then you need to stop relying on manipulation." At that point, the panel began to lose structure. The moderator called for a commercial break, but the camera remained on a few seconds too long. That extra footage was quickly uploaded online. It showed Karoline removing her microphone, placing it on the table, and saying under her breath, "This always happens when you let them talk too long." The word "them" spread rapidly across social media. Within an hour, hashtags began trending widely. Clips of the moment, along with discussion of the memo, circulated across YouTube and Twitter. Viewers paused and zoomed in on the document, trying to understand its contents. Journalists began investigating, and former staff members came forward, confirming the memo's authenticity. The document itself became a major point of discussion. What stood out most, however, was not just the content of the memo, but Jasmine's response. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't celebrate. She simply presented the information and allowed it to speak for itself. As the initial reaction settled, the impact became even more noticeable. By Friday morning, the clip had surpassed 3 million views. It spread far beyond traditional news, appearing on podcasts, Reddit discussions, Instagram reels, and private group chats. People debated the moment where Jasmine remained calm while Karoline reacted strongly in real time. But what many remembered most was not the argument itself. it was the contrast in composure. Jasmine stayed steady, spoke minimally, and never raised her voice, yet the tone of the entire conversation shifted around her presence. In Dallas, a retired teacher shared the clip and commented, "For years I was told to stay calm while being challenged. This is what that actually looks like." In Bakersfield, a college student wrote, "This wasn't just politics. It showed how calmness is sometimes misread when it actually holds strength." In Lansing, a political strategist quietly admitted that similar messaging strategies are used more widely than most people realize. What stood out wasn't just the exposure of the tactic, but the silence around it before now. Karoline's team responded quickly. A late-night statement described the memo as false and part of a coordinated effort. But by the following afternoon, former aides confirmed it was real. One even said phrases like, "emotionally unstable under pressure," had been discussed internally. That revelation led journalists to ask deeper questions. How common are these strategies? How long have messaging tactics like this been used? And why did it take a public moment to bring them into focus? Karoline stepped away from the public eye for several days. She canceled interviews and avoided public statements, according to network sources. Jasmine, however, did not engage in public celebration. Instead, she held a brief press appearance outside a community center in Louisiana. "I didn't share that document to embarrass anyone," she said. "I shared it because we've ignored too much for too long. We've tolerated patterns of disrespect while pretending it's normal." She continued calmly, "You don't need to raise your voice to be heard. You don't need to distort the truth to make a point. And you don't need to allow others to define you when they cannot out-argue you." The clip gained significant attention and became one of the most shared moments of the week. Commentators revisited past interviews where similar patterns appeared, people being interrupted, dismissed, or labeled overly emotional. The discussion shifted toward a broader issue: how public dialogue treats composure, disagreement, and credibility, especially in political spaces. Jasmine never set out to create a viral moment. Her focus was not attention but clarity. The deeper meaning of the situation continued to unfold in the days that followed. 3 days later, a local journalist in Ohio contacted Dana Haskins, the staffer who originally shared the memo. Dana, 27, a recent graduate and first-time political staff member, had remained anonymous until then. "I couldn't stay silent," she said. "Watching how things worked behind closed doors changed how I saw it. It stopped feeling like politics. It felt like a strategy to shape people before they even speak." She explained that she didn't release the memo impulsively. She saved it, reviewed it carefully, and waited until the public conversation developed. She didn't know exactly what would happen next, but she wanted the process to be visible. "I just wanted people to know these approaches are intentional," she said. "They're designed to silence voices that already have to work harder to be heard." After the article was published, Jasmine's office reached out privately to thank her, without publicity or statements. Later that evening, Jasmine hosted a live Q&A from her home office. No staff, no prepared script, just a direct conversation with viewers. One question asked why she didn't respond more aggressively during the panel. "I didn't need to," she said. "The truth doesn't require volume or aggression. It only needs space." Another asked what she hoped would come next. "I hope people pause before labeling someone as angry or irrational just because they disagree," she said. "And I hope systems stop using tactics that dismiss voices instead of engaging with them." The response was overwhelmingly positive. Many viewers described the moment as calm, clear, and grounded. The impact of the moment wasn't just about what was revealed, but how it was revealed. A composed approach had shifted a highly charged situation without escalation. Days later, Karoline returned briefly with a recorded statement, describing the situation as a misunderstanding and attributing it to stress. She also denied full awareness of the memo. However, the explanation did not significantly change public perception. Jasmine chose not to respond further. The conversation had already moved beyond individuals and into broader systems of communication and influence. Nearly 2 weeks later, she spoke at a small town hall in Texas. The room was modest, filled with a diverse audience of residents and students. There were no cameras or press presence. When asked how she remained calm under pressure, she replied, "You breathe. You remember your purpose. It stops being about you and becomes about the people who don't usually get heard." Another attendee asked about pressure to be perfect in public roles. "I stopped aiming for perfection," she said. "I aim for consistency and clarity. People deserve steady progress, not isolated moments." The audience responded with applause. The moment felt grounded rather than performative. Later that evening, she read a message from a teacher who said her students had watched the segment and discussed what composure looks like under pressure. Jasmine reflected quietly on it. The moment wasn't about a single person or incident anymore. It had become part of a larger conversation about perception, communication, and how people are treated when they speak up. The next morning, she posted a short message online: "Let the moment speak. Then let the work continue." No celebration followed. No final statement. Just a continued focus on dialogue, understanding, and consistency. Because in the end, it wasn't about a viral exchange. It was about what people choose to see when the noise fades and only the facts remain.